The Yemeni authorities confirmed today that the Prime Minister Ahmed al-Rahawi was assassinated in an Israeli strike that took place 2 days ago. If you remember, Israel said that they targeted the senior leadership of the Ansarullah movement, or more known as the Houthis. However, this attack was clearly targeting senior officials from the political side in the government that don't necessarily belong to Ansarullah or the Houthis. For example, the Prime Minister himself, Ahmed al-Rahawi, belongs to the People's Congress Party. They are not part of Ansarullah, and they are part of the civilian side in the government. This indicates that this attack that Israel carried out was nowhere near what they sold it out to be, especially in relation to the operations that are happening inside of Yemen being conducted by Israel, how far they are from what Israel portrays them to be. However, this will have implications. This will have serious implications because at the end of the day, he was appointed by Ansarullah and he is considered to be running the government of Yemen. He's the Prime Minister of Yemen. His assassination will not affect the day-to-day functioning of Ansarullah as a movement, nor the Yemeni armed forces. However, there were several responses coming from Yemen saying that Israel is expected to see dark days ahead. Now let's get into the details of this assassination. Israel published a list of senior figures from Ansarullah, from Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader, the defense minister, the spokesperson of the armed forces, figures who are directly involved in the attacks against Israel. However, because of the consistent Israeli failure to prevent the ongoing attacks against it from Yemen, they wanted something symbolic inside of Yemen that isn't necessarily directly linked to the operations that are happening against them, but so that it can at least portray it as an attack against Ansarullah. Therefore, they targeted these political leaders in Yemen alongside dozens of civilians. The Ansarullah movement said a couple of ministers were assassinated as well, without elaborating, but some reports said that the Minister of Transport, the Minister of Energy, a couple of other ministers were assassinated in this attack as well. So a couple of things we understand from this assassination. Israel is in a desperate position to try and achieve some sort of symbolic victory in Yemen because of its repeated failure. Israel is unable to reach the significant figures inside of Yemen, and Israel is unable to stop the attacks that are being conducted against it from Yemen. Israel isn't able to have any sort of success against the Yemeni people and the Yemeni attacks. So they carried out this attack. Now, in Israel, they're portraying this as some sort of, a huge success, and that, this is going to be a huge blow. There are more attacks that are about to come against Ansarullah. This will not be affecting the attacks that are coming against Israel. As a matter of fact, they are going to increase their attacks moving forward. And we had multiple statements coming from several Yemeni officials from the Ansarullah movement. And one of the first responses came from the Yemeni president al-Mashat, who said that the response is going to come soon and dark days are ahead of the Zionists. The revenge is coming from Yemen and they're going to be escalating their attacks against Israel. Another very important statement was made by Muhammad al-Bukhaiti, who is a senior figure in the political arm of Ansarullah, saying that Israel crossed all red lines and now we entered a new phase. What can Yemen do now? And how far can they escalate against Israel after the repeated attacks that they've been conducting, and especially after they introduced new multi-warhead missiles against Israel and are successfully landing it against it? Well, there are a couple of options with Ansarullah, especially in relation to the quantity of attacks and more attacks that are not directly related to their missile or drone capability. The missile and drone capability will be the most intense response coming from Ansarullah, but they have also prepared attacks on the ground. And don't be surprised if you all of a sudden see members of the Yemeni armed forces inside of occupied Palestine. That's not going to be something extraordinary, by the way. They have already prepared. They have ground troops. They prepared readiness to send hundreds of thousands of soldiers into occupied Palestine. They previously asked the countries bordering occupied Palestine to open the borders for them, and they are ready to do that. However, if they don't, and if they are unable to convince these people, they can find other ways to go and attack Israel too. Now, from an Israeli perspective, the answers that they are providing in relation to Yemen are not convincing the Israeli public, because the Israeli public are still seeing these attacks coming from Yemen. The Eilat port is already shut and declared bankruptcy and ceased to operate completely. So the Red Sea is a prohibited area completely when it comes to Israel, and they are conducting attacks in the Mediterranean against any Israeli-linked ship. Also, this attack against a prime minister of an independent nation shows you how much these rabid creatures wreak havoc all across the world. It's only the depraved Zionist creature who is allowed to conduct these operations without any sort of repercussions and without any condemnations, and people criticizing them, or at least, senior figures and politicians and world leaders criticizing them. What if we were talking about the assassination of a European prime minister or a European president? Would you be quiet? Or because the satanic chosen ones are enabled, they are somehow allowed to get away with all of these crimes? What's for sure is, though, Yemen is paying the price for an honorable position. And the Yemeni prime minister and everyone who was assassinated by the Zionists in Yemen are martyrs, and they are happy now with their Lord. No one is worried about them now. The worry is about the people who are not taking any action here on earth, witnessing a genocide and sitting there pretending to be supporting the oppressed people, and they're not doing anything and supporting Israel behind closed doors. The hypocrites, and there are many of them in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, and of course in the Western world. But Yemen is paying the price for an honorable position. And that's why Israel has a very big problem with them, and they're trying to have these symbolic attacks against them. However, what the Zionist creature, what the Zionist infidel will never understand is the divine spirit. It's the spiritual element of the Yemeni people and how they approach Israel as a genocidal entity. You can kill their prime minister, you can kill their president, you can kill the leader or the leader of the armed forces. You are talking about millions of people in Yemen. You are unable to kill all of them. That's number one. Secondly, they told you, even if there's one Yemeni left, he will be fighting Israel. So there will be no stopping of Yemen. The United States, with all of its military power, had to reach a deal with Yemen by force. They had to let go of their arrogance and ego and have a deal with Yemen because of the repeated attacks that the Yemenis conducted against the genocidal supporting US aircraft carriers and forces in the region, and the genocide coalition that includes Britain. Britain, of course, anything that the United States did, it's as if they are, the little poodle of the United States. No one is even talking to them. So Ansarullah were talking to the United States because they were running the coalition. But Britain followed suit because Britain is the poodle of the United States. And whatever the United States does, Britain goes ahead with, similar to other European countries. So if the United States was forced to go into a deal with Yemen, to the disliking of Israel, by the way. Israel did not approve of this, and they did not want this, and they lobbied the United States to keep their troops inside of the Red Sea so that they can apply more pressure on Ansarullah to stop the attacks against Israel. But that failed. And the United States had to reach a deal with Ansarullah in Yemen. What is Israel going to do? Israel isn't as well equipped as the United States. Israel is tiny in comparison to the United States. Israel doesn't have the same technology or capacity or navy or air force as the United States does. They can conduct attacks, they can go and come back, they can potentially have people killed or people from the political side, or even in the future, senior figures from Ansarullah, but they are unable to change the equation with Yemen. More articles are being published in Israel on how they are incapable of having any sort of change in Yemen, and how all of these attacks are just symbolic. The Israelis themselves are confirming that. So no amount of attack against Yemen and no assassination is going to stop any of the Yemeni attacks. And as a matter of fact, after this assassination, there is expected to be a really intense retaliation from Yemen and a new phase that we haven't seen before. And they've already said, our actions come before our words. So the next few days and next few weeks will be really intense, and more surprises are coming from Yemen against the genocide state.